All right. So, as always, most of the stuff I cover off the site is already up and published. You can read it right now. If you want to get the details, that's where you go. Here, I'll just kind of cover whatever we cover. And this time around, it's the top 20 albums of September. They're all personal choices. I kind of emphasize that up front. Uh, this month, it's heavily weighted by extreme metal. I think it usually is, but in this case, very few outliers. No real rock records. Maybe one doom metal record. So that doesn't necessarily reflect everything that I listen to, but it's just everything that I cover for this site is what people will read, and that's just kind of it's the promos that people send me. Realistically, it's once you start getting noticed for one thing, people just keep sending the same thing. So here's a lot of I look for variety as much as I can though. So anyway, October is just a couple days away, and I think there's a lot of great releases that I'll eventually talk about coming out pretty soon, but not quite on the level of September. Close though. Um, and then basically my notes before starting is that I'll probably start writing less and in less detail for the next 3 months. I think that um, yeah, it doesn't seem to be entirely worth the effort to put in, 2,000 words for the average reader. I think people are reading less and less now, and it becomes formulaic when I have to churn out quite as much thought and due diligence. I try to show the work in the review. So, yeah, I just expect maybe less of a bio, less of an introduction, more just straight to it. Because that seems, I mean, I just have to cater to the fact that people have no attention span and an unwillingness to read in their daily lives. And, uh, if I want to reach people who like this kind of music, I really have to bow down to the fact that they are all um, addicted to social media. So that's, you have to adapt once in a while if you want to, you know. So anyway, the album of the month for my taste shouldn't be a huge surprise to anybody. It's Gutfreud's Durance of Lightless Horizons. This Canadian band out of what is it, Toronto, and more recently a quartet. And I did a video review of this already. I did a written review of this already. Just expect a good mixture of progressive, uh, death metal, death doom, and more atmospheric kinds of uh, death metal. So it says something that that it was uh, members of like Hooded Menace and like Krallis involved, if that makes sense, with the mixing and mastering of it, or production and all that. So, uh, and so the choice between one and two was not arbitrary. I think that ultimately I spent more time with this record on account of it being 52 minutes or so, but also it was something that I just connected with more. This is more just my type of death metal, and it has been for years. I think in the review I mentioned Remnants of Expansion by Crypts, and that's not for the sake of comparison directly, so much as that's one of my favorite records in general from the last 10 years. And this has a lot of the things that I love about that record involved too. So that's where I'm coming from with that one. I also recently did a video review of our Ares Kingdom's In Darkness at Last. This is sort of a different thrash metal based lineage beyond Order from Chaos, an 80s, sort of late 80s spawned early form of black death metal that was really in a league of its own. And I think Ares Kingdom they've always continued to be in their sort of post millennium format. Very consistent band, and this just happens to be very good. the songwriting happens to be very good. And what I mean is that feeling of 80s death metal, that sort of catchier, kind of punk affected side of things, creeps into the songwriting and the performances. So it's very over the top, very heavy, just and raw and sort of unexpected ways. There are so many memorable moments on this album that it's one of the best albums of the year. And I think I said that this was like going to be number one of the year. I meant of like one or two of this month in the review. So it's number two this month on the year. But I, you know, I don't give out perfect scores, but this is like the easiest recommendation for me this month. If you like extreme metal, this is where I would go. Obviously, your taste is going to vary. Most people won't enjoy it, but in general, it's something you should be exposed to. So, and I just happen to be a fan for the 20 years. So, Orthodoxy's second album, second full length, Aether Ignis, is one of a couple of great releases from the Sinister Flame. They've been very consistent from the start. Not a bad record on their output yet, and this is one of the only death metal bands that has been on the roster. I think their first release was Domains, which is an immolation-esque death metal band, and it happens that the drummer from that band started this band as a solo project back in 2015. So think of it as occult death metal, a little bit of death doom, and so these are vague references. So Cruciamentum, Necros Christos, those have a little bit more of an direct, like Onward to Golgotha translation in their best works. And this has more of a early immolation-esque side to it. But this record is a little bit slower. It has a little bit more emphasis on leads. There's a little bit more Morbid Angel in there. And I found myself being very surprised by it and listening to it quite a lot. So that made up a good chunk of my listening towards the end of the month, because I wasn't really expecting it to catch with me. The last one was very good. I just, they've done more than iterate here, but this would not alienate anyone who liked the last one. Or if you like this one, listen to the last one, because it's freaking great too. Miscreants, this is an Italian group of people who, a quartet, I think. They formed as a kind of a thrash metal band who are interested in sort of the creator side of things. How can I put it? Pleasure to Kill was a little bit of what they were doing, but there was kind of blackened, and it was a different band. Okay, so they decided to pivot, change what they were doing, and it happened to be Miscreants, and their sound was basically just atheist from the start, but they have this sort of background in more technical thrash metal. So, like the full spread of subgenre here is old school technical thrash influenced progressive death metal from the earlier school of things, the Florida bands. And so we get a bit of atheist, we get a bit of not really so much cynic. There's some Oblivion in there on purpose. Like actually seeing a band who likes Oblivion and has a song or two on their record that sound like them is very impressive. I was just immediately a fan because it's one of my favorite bands. And this record, I don't know. I feel like there's just a need to qualify the fact that it's good with like, oh, it's not that original, but it's really not necessary. Like, yes, you're getting the standard of Unquestionable Presence. You're getting the format of questionable Presence, but you're getting a personal work and like a very good, very detailed, and very inspired one. Few bands could and have ever gotten to this level, and I think that especially with this type of death metal, death thrash metal, if you will. So I couldn't deny it its due effect, and it's stuck with me. I ordered the vinyl. I'm pretty sure I did, because it was like $60 because I had to order it from Italy, I think. So uh, yeah, I'd like to see what they do next. I think their tape was great, and I think this was just exceeded my expectations. The only thing is, I like, do you just keep iterating on that sort of atheist-esque sound, which is fine with me. Make 10 of those, just totally, that's fine. But interesting to see what happens next for them. Hopefully, big tours and things like that. I still haven't figured out how to pronounce this band name. Uh, I assume Kanan or Kynan Dawn is a French black metal band, and Lagu is their, I believe it's their fourth album for Osmos now. And this was a band that sort of people noticed when Orthodox black metal was becoming a thing, when Death Spell Omega was a bigger deal to start. And people were looking around like, what else did we miss in French black metal? And these these guys, they were coming from a sort of a pagan black metal sort of point of view to start, but quickly you realize that was not what they were intending to do with this band. It was their previous bands were more aligned with classic black metal, and this, like a lot of Orthodox black metal bands around the time, they were focused on uh, a different sort of I don't want to say dark ambient, maybe dark wave. There wasn't a vocal part of it that was influenced by like dark wave or gothic rock or post punk or anything like that. And this is not like Secrets of the Moon or whatever, in its full transformation here. But anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. It's a great atmospheric black metal record with which I would call an epic black metal record, and that's because it essentially, what I say in the review is that it rewards patience. It rewards people who are ready to sit down with a record and wait for it to kick in. And it does kick in, and it's turned into one of my favorite black metal records of the year. And I think just because it demanded my time and it delivered when I gave it my time, and it continues to be a great thing to pick up. And there's a lot of memorable moments here. There's a lot of great performances, and just a high standard in general, you know. So I definitely had to put that higher up on the list because I've just sat with it so much. And yeah. Now you can go back in their discography a little bit and find some precedents, but again, this is also notable because it's just different from everything they've done before. And it's like, not only did they try something new and did something very well that was new, they just there's no glitch, there's no part that doesn't fit or work. It's just this very imposing, huge wave of change, and it's all good from where I'm coming from. So the second album from Innumerable Forms, which is, it started as Justin Titore's solo kind of Finnish death metal project, sort of influenced by all manner of things, and he's added some people from various popular bands, everyone from like Power Trip and Genocide Pact and Iron Lung. So they definitely work together more on this album. You can tell. There's it's sort of like the idea. Everyone got the note. It was like, make a great death doom metal record, firmly planted in the early '90s. Will touch a little bit upon like the early British stuff, like right past Paradise Lost, the first Paradise Lost record. Not as many notes of like the Finnish death metal side of things on this one. A little bit less of the slower, kind of brutal, just generally less of the slower songs on here, and more influence from traditional doom metal. So my two notes here for where there was a lot of trouble in some of the movement and the solos, and a bit of warning, not so much Solstice, but again, there's like a little bit of British doom wherever you go on this record, and all of it's great. I mean, that's all some of my favorite stuff in the sort of traditional and non-traditional doom metal categories. So now, how does it translate if you're just a fan of old school death metal and you want something that's brutal? I think it translates pretty well. There are riffs here. It is pretty aggressive, and it still works in that way. I think that they still want to meet that standard of like, this is a death metal record, you know. But it is kind of a emotionally driven record, so I appreciated it quite a bit. So Spectrumortis is a Spanish band. Um, Now I knew about them because I follow Black Seed Productions quite a bit. I think I have most of their releases that are not like ultra limited. Um, so I was excited to see these guys signed to Listenable, and we're gonna get kind of a big debut record out of it. And this is it. And it's one of those things where it starts out like I start out thinking like, oh, this is a pretty good record. There's some death doom in there. There's some occult death metal. It's sort of like same with Orthodoxy, where they're both Spanish bands. I don't think these guys are from Valencia, from what I remember, but their style is it creeps up on you. There's the rewards continue to develop over time, and basically, how can I put it? I just got into the record. Like I sat down and listened to it, and it was great. Like I, I'm such a dumbass lately about like why I like things, which is a problem. But it's just like uh, big riffs, interesting theme throughout. Very much dealing with Sumerian curses and incantations to remove them. That's kind of where the name of the album comes from. You can look it up. You can learn about it yourself. These things involve and different deities, and I'm a nerd for that kind of thing. I think it's awesome. I think ancient Sumeria and death metal just go together pretty well, you know. So, uh, otherwise, I think sonically speaking, it's just or just production wise, however you want to put it, um, it's just stunningly rendered. I think that's like it's just fantastic sounding album. Um, and I wasn't expecting that. They were. I really liked their previous EP, but I didn't know They really had much more in the gas tank in terms of like riffs and that more accessible direction. Where I don't know if it's not quite Hooded Menace, but you would like it if you like Darkness Drips Forth or something like that. So I haven't seen a lot of people talking about it, and it's a shame because it's a great record. Uh, Woe is a traditional doom metal band out of Australia. I think Tasmania, because I think that's where the Wizard are from. It has the guy from Tarot and the Wizard in it. Not the Finnish Tarot, but the Australian one who put out a record back in 2016. Um, and this is just a great doom metal record. It leads with the riff and it ends with the riff, and it's great in between. What can I? What fault is there? Yeah, again, I'm a fan of Trouble. There's a bit of that in here. There's a bit of heavy psychedelic rock in there, but in general, this album is about the doom metal riff, making it big, and just hitting it, and that should sell it right there for most people. Um, Brent, Brent is a death metal band with members of Ruin and oh shit, uh, the guy, what's the I'm not going to remember the name of the other band until later, but basically well known sort of Los Angeles area death metal artists, musicians who they put out a great record at the very end of I think last year and or 2020 whatever it was, and like you notice none of this is sticking in my mind, right? It's because it was the end of the year. I didn't have time to get around to it. I had to take a break at the end of the year from all the releases that I cover, and I just didn't get to it in time, and I had to clean the slate and just start the year, you know. So I'm glad they released this one in the middle of the summer, because or the late summer, because I was able to take plenty of time to enjoy it, and I definitely found their lead guitarists are even better this time around. A lot of dual leads, lots of harmonized leads, a lot of appropriate, like brutality-esque leads, and riffs to back that up. You know, this is an impressive, brutal, and just very solid death metal record. And you wouldn't expect any less from Rotted Life. Um, so they should have a chip on their shoulder at this point because their discography continues to impress. I mean, yeah, pretty straightforward appeal there. Dead Void, yeah, I could be reductive with this record. Like, these are fairly known musicians from various groups who have formed into a death doom metal trio, I believe, based out of, is it Denmark or Belgium? One of those countries. um, Denmark. And Volatile Forms comes after a pretty solid demo. You knew what they were going to sound like. They were going to sound like Cyanide, and they sound like early Cyanide times 10 is how I would put it. Very like so one of the reasons Cyanide is so heavy is because their bassist uses I believe just an overdrive pedal or a distortion pedal. Uh, when he plays live, you notice it right away when they just cut to the bassist alone, and you notice it right away when Dead Void start to play. Uh, this album sounds huge. It's one of the more striking productions for me for the month. I think that it just it caught me with how heavy it was, and sort of in the same way that Innumerable Forms shows their taste in the doom metal riff on their record, and just traditional doom metal in general. So did Dead Void, and so uh, maybe that's just being influenced by various death doom metal bands or whatnot. But I know one of the members was a live bassist in Conan, so there's obviously some interest in actual doom metal as well. So that's this record stuck with me for a while. I don't know if it's gonna stay way up there for by the end of the year, but it was very impressive this month. And I like how the cover's a little bit different. There's everything about this record's a little bit different. Even if I would, I could easily categorize it if I wanted to. So Nordjebel's third or fourth album, I forget, um, is absolutely brutal. And normally this is the kind of thing where maybe it's a quick 7 out of 10, and you know I really enjoy Norwegian black metal in general, and I think you can meet a certain standard without even having to be creative. Honestly, just because it's sonically so uh, just more than the average guitar record. So Nordjebel stand out because they're more and more than that. Um, this is for me, the most brutal of Norwegian black metal. The sort of things that go beyond like Panzer Division Marduk and some of those dark funeral records where they're just it's like they set the blast to 240 beats per minute and just went with it for all the songwriting. This is brutal in a similar way, but uh, so they added Destructor to the lineup, which is it's a big deal. I mean, he I don't know if he had a lot of fun playing with Morbid Angel, and I know that whatever, it was probably cool playing live, but the record wasn't great, and most people at that point people forgot that this guy, I think he's involved in Odium now, but he played in Merkskog and Zyklon, and like people must have forgotten how great those bands were. It was like the age of brutal death metal meeting up with the like Norwegian black metal at the same time, and not bothering with keyboards really for most of them, and just being absolutely brutal. And so this took me back there because the drummer is fantastic on this record. Um, he's from the Wretched End. I think he played on an In Battle record too. So uh, this was one of those records where I just couldn't put it down. I just kept listening to it. It the drumming just hypnotized my dumb ass, and I just kept listening to it. So had to put it on here because it's just great black metal record. Um, Celestial Grave is another great black metal record, but for different reasons. So these guys started out as more of like a chaotic, not chaotic, what's the right word? Kind of ritualistic, spiritually guided raw black metal sound, definitely aiming to be different, and they were doing so. I think the last record sort of gave that ceiling of their sort of melodic ideas developing. They sort of became better musicians, and it wouldn't have made sense to ignore that thread and how good it was, right? So here on Vitriolic Atonement, they fully go very melodic, and it's a modern style. So it's not your typical nowadays black metal record, but in some ways it kind of is very accessible, and almost to the point where you're just about like just too sweet, or sort of bittersweet in its themes. But I couldn't help but compare it to their label mates Aetheric. You can watch and read that review too. So I just I stuck to that record really quick. It was an immediate, yeah, I was into it, and I also find that album art is just uh, so interesting to look at. Uh, Algebra's Chiroptera, I think this is their fourth album, second for Unspeakable Acts Records, and uh, what would I think most people would consider them probably a technical thrash metal band, but their sound is very much rooted in old school thrash. Uh, what else could I really say about Algebra? Um, I guess what's notable is that they picked up the sound from Pulse, the previous album. It was a popular album, and they basically the vocalist restaffed the entire band because the other guys were just kind of done. And so he took this idea and built it up, and rather than had to, he didn't struggle at all recreating it. And the impressive thing is that uh, he had the insight to really work on the vocals. And what I mean is that there's melody that is valuable on this album. It's a memorable semi-melodic thrash metal record that isn't bad cheese. It's a great riff album too. So uh, yeah, I picked it up several times since reviewing it, and it seems like it's going to hold up pretty well. So Void Oath, that's one of the more recent additions here. I don't know that my review did it justice. I didn't do a video review of it, but cause I was kind of scatterbrained, thinking of trying to figure out what the right angle was for talking about this thing. Um, it really just came down to the fact that it's a death doom metal record with sludge metal influence from people who are well versed in psychedelic doom metal. Now, that's like 3 degrees of very similar things structurally that amount to a record with a lot of good doom metal riffs on it, and with very harsh vocals. And the theme is pretty cool here because I guess, in sort of expanding upon like a record based around John Carpenter's The Thing, they looked at other versions of that story, which it was inspired by or based on. It was a remake of a 50s movie, and that was based on a short story from 1938. And So for me, one of my favorite things is the golden era of science fiction, and that happens to be a classic of that, and one that, anyway, I'm not going to nerd out about it, but uh, it just, there's a couple of mishaps on the record that don't make it far from perfect, but in general, it's just more of like the pleasure listening, the sort of I want a riff and a growl kind of record, but it it has this sort of psychedelic doom metal wander to it. Like they'll just zone out once in a while, and it'll last for like 4 minutes, and it's not pronounced. It's still part of the song. You can kind of feel the record, kind of just drifting off, and it's cool when it as it comes and goes throughout the full listen because these are pretty long and involved songs. So entertaining listening for me. I haven't reviewed Hussar's All-Consuming Hunger yet. This was I think a Toronto, or I don't think they're out of Quebec. I think it's a Toronto-based band. It could be, am I wrong? Yeah, Toronto-based death metal band. Um, a trio, as far as I understand, and they started out playing kind of a modern death doom metal sound, and they've sort of developed their sound over the last 4 years, kind of in the same way that Gut Void developed theirs, where it got a little bit more progressive. It got a little less, more directly doom metal riff oriented, but this is less rooted in old school death metal and more just exploring their like modern death metal ideals and movement, and sort of leaning into progressive death metal slightly more. So I haven't finished a review yet, so it's still in process. That's all you're going to get for now. Um, so Eco Depths. Oh, a lot of Canadian stuff this month, but this guy's actually originally from Ukraine. Um, so Ego Depths is a solo funeral doom metal project from a fellow out of right. I already said that, Quebec, and his name is Stigmatheist. Yeah, interesting name. Uh, so the whole thing with this one is that so spiritual funeral doom is not necessarily a unique thing out of Ukraine, but he does it particularly well, and the reason that he does is because one, the sound design is pretty fine. The homage to classic funeral doom metal is exceptional and often melodic, and he does so while incorporating an intentionally ritualistic feeling use of indigenous or ancient instruments. So, there's the first song here has like a sort of an extended sitar accompaniment and things like that, or something that sounds like that. And there's a Thai jaw harp in one song. So for me, even if you know all that sounds kind of crazy and you're not sure what the fuck I'm talking about, if you know like Skepticism and Shape of Despair, you're in the right ballpark already. About 20-minute songs, deeper vocal register. So very much for me, it's got that brittleness that funeral doom needs, where it's not overproduced, and that I found it a really satisfying record to pick up and listen to in parts. Live Burial, is this their fourth full length? I think so, and it's a British death metal band. They basically sound like late 80s Possessed. Why do I keep saying Possessed? Pestilence and early Asphyx. The Martin Van Drunen led albums, the first album from each of those bands. And on this album, they're aiming for a more unique atmosphere. They're getting compared to Skeletal Remains a bit. I guess that makes sense if you just want to lead people in that direction. I think Skeletal Remains were always like more like Pestilence plus like early like Consider Dead or something like that, like a slightly more technical period of Gorguts after the first album. the first Gorgates album would apply here. I maybe I compare their sound to Morgoth again, but just in general, it's a good um, old school death metal album that is obviously doing something a bit different. Like, it looks a bit different, it sounds a bit different, and I think this is probably their best record to date. I like the last one quite a bit. It still holds up, so this is a good kind of accompaniment to that one. Abhor is a Italian black metal band. They didn't always sound like this. So a lot of people think that, well, they've got a big discography, they always sounded like this. No, they really only sounded like this with the heavy use of keyboards and all that in the last few years, or last few releases. Before that, they were a little bit more typical of Italian underground black metal, where there was a heavy Scandinavian influence and, a fair use of keyboards and whatnot. So they've changed keyboard players a few times, and it's changed their sound each time. So this time they have, I think it's, oh shit, is this the, I think this is, I'm probably right. I think this is the album that has the guy from War Moon Lord on keyboards. And if I'm wrong, I'm going to sound stupid about that. But basically, it's a catchy record, and that's kind of why it stuck with me. If you like early Samael, if you like a little bit of a Christ Agony, um, or even just early Italian black metal like Mortuary Drape and Necromass. Necromass has kind of their own thing going on that some of those records, but you get the idea. Um, yeah, so that's a little bit campy. It's a little bit fun. It's a little bit just heavy metal in general. So take it as you will. But for me, I love this sound, and I think it it was great to sit there and just kind of have it on repeat for a few hours every time I picked it up. I also, anything with an organ as a central focus is already a bonus. But on this record, there's always more than one layer of keyboards, and it really adds to the depth of this in such a impressive way. Yeah, it's very much worth mentioning that the keyboards on this record are just a huge boon to their sound. Epoch of Light haven't put out a record since 2005, as far as I know. I think they've released some things, but At War with the Multiverse, it's definitely had time to think about what it wants to be. And what they've done is they've smartly tempered some of the more overt black metal influences for the sake of doing what they kind of do best, which is a blackened melodic death metal sound, which is very much related to the early 90s advent or impulse that came from bands like Dissection and Dawn and Unanimated and those sorts of groups. They definitely take that all the way up to, I would say, like earlier In Flames levels of melodic death metal, and they're it's not like they're not conscious that like bands like Omnium Gatherum and all them also amplified like the sonic depth of depth of field is how I'll put it. But these guys know that they're still in that range of like early USBM, where a lot of bands heard like Dissection, and then everything from Absu to a lot of the great stuff out of Ohio, and so anyway, great record. The guitar performances will sell you on it within minutes. I didn't do a full review of it just because I just had so many things on my plate at the time where I didn't, it was like, yeah, I can definitely identify this as one of those, and I could definitely go through their discography and be a little bit reductive. I didn't like the vocals on one of the records. I didn't like the riffs on the other record, and I generally like everything they've done, but I didn't give this one due due diligence to start. So I wrote a short review for it, and it stuck with me. I kept picking it up, and it's one of the better records out this month. And there's a lot. You'll see the honorable mentions. There's like 19 records in my honorable mentions. So um, here's another one where I couldn't not put this on here, even though there were some records I should have put on here, like Deformatory and all. Anyway, I'll get to those other ones. But Insanguinate's Eldritch Anatomy is a debut from this. Is it Slovakian or Slovenian? Slovenian band, death metal band, and I think most of these guys have played in thrash metal bands, and they're definitely old school metalheads. And of course, their interest in Swedish death metal is not typical. It's not the buzzsaw shit. It's the stuff I really like. You know, like the more thrash oriented stuff, like Liars in Wait, uh, or Grotesque, and a lot of the early Morbid Angel influence stuff, like the first At the Gates album, and the Alf Svensson sort of style of songwriting, which translates here. This one was very well overlooked, like completely, and I'm kind of surprised because yeah, it really stuck with me. I felt like such a dumbass for not just reviewing it in full, just like the last one. So had to include it here, just because it deserves a nod, and that's a great band, and a great record. So, so all right. In terms of honorable mentions, none of these are any less good. Um, I think there's a few that I just probably wouldn't recommend to most people. There's a few that didn't stand up to how much I liked other things. They're like some of them are just EPs, and I try to prioritize full lengths for this list. But Altars Ablaze, Bones, Deformatory, Mortuous. I mean, Mortuous probably should have been up there somewhere on that list. Uh, yeah, Worms was very memorable. Fantastic songs in that album, and Lunar Spells as well. Yeah, so anyway, you get the idea. There's a lot of great music out this month. That's just 20 of the records that sort of hit me in the right spot, and go make your own decisions. Go check out the full article and listen to each one. There's links to listen to them, and if you got opinions, save them. Don't send them to me. Send them to the bands. Tell them how much you like their album. Talk to them about their album. Don't bother me about it. Bother them and tell them that you like them. Bands want to know that. I don't care. So, yeah, get to it.